Welcome to the Live Explore podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit like and subscribe. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sean Payne, founder of Live Explore Real Estate and Lifestyle, and welcome to the Live Explore 15-Minute Village podcast. I have with me today my co-host, Isaiah Chass. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
And we have a really cool guest today, Paul Fritz of Fritz Architecture out in Sebastopol.
Yep.
So let's just talk about urbanism and kind of everything that you do that way.
Sure.
So how long have you lived in Sebastopol?
I have lived in Sebastopol for about 21 years.
Okay.
Yeah, about 21 and a half years. Moved up there from San Francisco. Actually, we were looking in Petaluma and Sebastopol, and we were deciding to move out of the city. We had a baby and a one-bedroom apartment, and it felt like the time to buy. And so we looked in both Petaluma and Sebastopol. I was kind of pushing for Petaluma just because I was still working in San Francisco. Just closer, shorter commute. But, our first offer we got accepted was in Sebastopol, so that's where we ended up.
Did you have roots up here in Sonoma County, or
No.
what kind of drew you up here?
So my wife is from Novato.
Oh, okay.
And so she had been up here a lot, growing up. And she actually has said, she remembers being in high school with a friend and being in Sebastopol thinking, this would be a nice town to raise a family. And,
Right.
20 years later, there she was, starting to raise a family in Sebastopol. So be careful what you say.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. No, that's I could see Novato wouldn't be as appealing, I would think, to you in their downtown area, especially 21 years ago.
Yeah. So. We were definitely looking to be in a walkable environment still. We were been in San Francisco for a long time, and we're used to getting around by foot and bike. And even when we were looking up here, our realtor kept showing us these country properties, and we're like,
right,
we don't want the country property. We don't want acreage. We live in a little apartment. We just want a little more space and not too much yard, because I like gardening and stuff, but we didn't want acres to take care of.
Right.
Right. So, we really wanted to focus on being able to walk around, having our daughter be able to walk to school and all that. So, we, looked in San Rafael was one we sort of initially considered, but just wasn't really in our price range to live close to downtown. And, we ended up here. And we wanted to live close to the coast as well. We wanted to...
Sure.
Definitely be closer to the coast. I was considering the East Bay, and my wife was like, I need the beach. We need to be closer to the beach. So
I think what you just described, we're in real estate, is what we hear so often. Kind of what drives our market is people often getting out of the city or some area, wanting to come up here and wanting a little bit slower life in a small community and being close to the ocean or wine country or something like that nature.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah. So.
Were you involved with architecture and urbanism prior to, I'm assuming you were, prior to moving up to Sebastopol? Was there any part of that drew you to Sebastopol as well?
Not specifically. Like I said, when I first moved up here, I was still working in San Francisco. I was working for a firm that did a lot of affordable housing.
Okay.
And then when we first moved here, I continued working for them for about a year until I got a job in Santa Rosa, also working for an architect that did primarily affordable housing types of work. I've always been somewhat interested in kind of planning and urban design as well. I haven't really done that much professionally, but I definitely think about it a lot. And I have a blog that I write about urbanism called Small Town Urbanism.
Which anyone that's listening definitely should go check it out. There's a ton of really cool stuff in there.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I got get that out of my system, kind of writing and thinking about that kind of stuff. I feel like I've had that in me for a long time, and I kind of wish I had, when I got my master's degree, I wish I had done a joint urban design architecture kind of program rather than just strictly architecture, because I feel like that's something I don't get to do as much professionally as I would like.
Right. No, I can really relate to that, actually. It's a cool field that never even just came across, in my younger years that way. So, I can totally understand that.
Yeah, I feel like I've thought, I think back to, growing up and stuff, I feel like I've always been attracted to cities and that kind of environment. Even as a kid, I grew up in a very kind of suburban environment outside of Cleveland, actually.
Oh, okay.
And I just remember always, every time we go into Cleveland, I had an aunt and uncle that lived on the other side of Cleveland. We sometimes meet downtown or do things in Cleveland. I always love being in the city and
Right.
the energy and the vibrancy and the walking and all that. And it's been, something that's been just sort of in me, I feel like, that comes out every once in a while.
Is it from your blog? So we met you through, was it an Urban Chat?
Yeah, it was an Urban Chat.
Urban Chat.
Affordable housing project.
Yeah, affordable housing project. Was it through your blog that you connected with that community locally, or?
Yeah, so I met Dave Alden.
Uh-huh.
I was involved in an effort, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years ago now. This group we were calling Urban Community Partnership.
Okay.
And we brought Chuck Marone from Strong Towns and Joe Minicosi from Urban 3 out to do kind of a study. It's primarily Santa Rosa, but we kind of looked at the county and kind of did Joe Minicosi's kind of thing where he looks at the land use per acre, productivity of, he did like basically the whole county. They did the parcels throughout the county. And
right.
so we brought them here for that, and had a few kind of public events in Santa Rosa. We invited elected officials and people to come and hear what they had to say, and so that's where I initially met Dave, and then I've sort of followed him in his Petaluma Urban Chat.
Yep, he's a rock star. He's a great guy.
I wish I had the energy and the time to do what he does.
Right. That's what we probably tell him like twice a week is like, how are you just going nonstop? Like I'm exhausted. Yeah. I'm exhausted by Tuesday. Just going to a couple meetings.
Events.
No.
It's one after another. Sometimes we have to take a break.
Yeah.
Yeah. So So you've always had a passion for architecture and urbanism.
Mm-hmm.
What type of services do you and your firm provide now?
So mostly architecture. I like to do affordable housing still. So I try to do affordable housing when I can.
And you've done some, for people that are listening, pretty big projects.
Yeah, when I worked for the firm in Santa Rosa, one of our regular clients was Burbank Housing.
Okay.
We did. So I've worked as project architect on a number of Burbank Housing projects.
Right.
And since I've been on my own, it's been about 13 years. I still have done some of those. Larger affordable housing, and there's one client in particular, community housing, Sonoma County. I've done quite a few projects with. Some of those are veterans. We did a couple of veterans housing projects. An affordable housing project with a kind of partnership with another architecture firm in Cloverdale. It was finished construction last year. And then other just residential remodel, new homes, a lot of ADUs. ADUs are getting really popular.
Right.
Getting a lot of inquiries about ADUs, and a variety. Like some are like completely new construction, some are remodeling a garage or another existing building. So kind of a wide range of ADU types of projects. And a little bit of commercial work. I mentioned doing a couple of spaces in the Barlow. I did the Bear Republic in Roner Park that is now shuttered, but
right.
Yeah,
They were sold off. Yeah. No, that was a cool place. I didn't know that. I used to go there quite a bit.
Yeah.
With the ADUs, are you seeing more? There might not be any correlation with this, but are you seeing more homeowners, landowners that want to do ADUs with properties closer to town, or is it more country properties on significant acreage?
It's been a mix.
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely done some out in the county, outside of any jurisdiction, city jurisdiction. But I've also, done them in town as well.
Sure.
A couple in Sebastopol, several in kind of in Santa Rosa and JC neighborhood, and but then some of they're further afield. And they're for a variety of purposes too. Like some are for an older parent that's moving in, or
Right.
some just want the extra space and aren't, it's more of like a guest suite kind of thing. And some people are planning on renting them out to, whoever, just as a rental property. So it's kind of a variety of reasons. Some people are downsizing. One client has a big house. Her kids are gone, and she's thinking, I retire, I want to downsize into something smaller, and so she'll probably rent the big house out and live in the ADU.
Right.
One property right now where they're actually building the ADU first. It was a fire rebuild property, so they're going to build the ADU and live in that.
Is it the one around the corner?
No, this is one that's actually it's on Bennett Ridge.
Got it.
Outside of Santa Rosa.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was thinking
Yeah.
about that in Sebastopol.
Yeah, no. So anyway, so yeah, kind of a variety of locations and a variety of reasons for doing it.
No, that's great. I
Yeah.
mean, I think I saw yesterday, I just read that California built 24,000 ADUs this year, which I was a little surprised that was that many. It was up
Yeah.
from like 1,500 20 years ago or something
Yeah.
like that. So it's really increased.
Yeah.
And I think that just shows like the functionality of what you said.
Mhm.
Like it can totally increase the functionality of a property to like what you need it to. Like
Yeah.
you just gave like a dozen
Yeah.
scenarios, right?
Yeah.
Like of
Yeah.
what it's used for. And that's what we find too.
Yeah.
So I just think it's hopefully that trend continues that way.
Yeah,
So
I think that the state has really come down pretty hard on making jurisdictions make it easier to do,
Right.
and kind of get out of the way, and that sort of shows what can happen when cities kind of get out of the way.
Yeah. No.
And let people build housing.
Yep.
People will do it.
And it's cool with Sebastopol. Sebastopol is such a cool town. It's so walkable.
Mhm.
But as we've talked about before,
Mhm.
there's just not that much downtown centralized housing. So
No.
if there's a way to bring some further housing closer to downtown,
Yeah.
that's one of the primary ways that's going to be accomplished.
Yeah, I think so. There's not, Sebastopol's pretty built out. We have an urban growth boundary like everybody else. We don't have a lot of big properties that are going to get a big housing development. There's one that's in construction right now. It's an affordable housing project.
Uh-huh.
And then there's one that apparently is coming forward. It's on the very north end of town. It's a several acre property. But there's not many properties of an acre or larger
Right.
in Sebastopol that could really accommodate a significant number of units.
Right.
To be able to do that, to be able to increase the number of units in Sebastopol, it's going to be mostly through ADUs or SB9 kind of situations.
Projects, yeah,
Right.
that's a good point. I want to get more into that,
Yeah.
But I want to veer off a little bit because of your experience in affordable housing.
Mhm.
Can you tell us like what challenges you always face in affordable housing, and have those challenges changed in recent years, or have they compounded to become more a problem?
Yeah, there's it's always just about finding the right site. Affordable housing developers, just like everybody else, are looking for a property that they can afford,
Right.
and develop, and
Right.
and also, that they can develop in a way that it is easier from an entitlement standpoint.
Uh-huh.
Although I have to say a lot of affordable projects that I've worked on needed a zoning amendment or a general plan amendment or whatever, just because the land wasn't zoned appropriately
Right.
for multifamily or whatever, so that has always been the case. And again, I think with the state coming down and saying you just need to let this happen in more places, that I think that's getting easier. You're finding less complicated entitlement processes than you used to, because the state's just like, if it meets these criteria, you have to basically allow it by right.
Right.
So in that sense, I think it's getting a bit easier. It's the challenge with affordable housing has always just been the financing of it too.
Right.
They're extremely complicated to put together. I mean, much more so I think than market rate, because there's just usually a huge pool of different funding.
Subsidies and things of that nature. Yeah, that was that was kind of where my question was going. Is it harder now with cost of building materials and land?
I think it's certainly harder. It's always been a competitive
Sure.
process. To get a lot of affordable housing is done through tax credits, and those are very competitive. And some of the communities in Sonoma County get benefit of being rural. There's kind of a rural, sort of a separate pool for rural communities versus urban communities, the tax credit process, but it's very competitive. There's always, basically, if you want to get a tax credit for an affordable housing project, you have to get the maximum number of points, and then they have all these like sort of tiebreaker categories from that, that you need to, because that's how they sort of give you points when you submit, and you get a lot of points actually for being in an environment that's closer to amenities, grocery stores, schools, workplaces, and things like that. Like you actually get points to the tax credit application process for being a more walkable location.
Right. I know very little about the process, but it seems like there's some complicated metrics there to figure this out.
And if I'm not mistaken, those aren't awarded until the project is fully approved or entitled, correct?
Yeah, you have to get your entitlements to be competitive.
Yeah, so think about that you have to invest all that to get it through the entitlement process, not even guaranteed that you have the funding mechanism in place to see the project through.
And I've definitely been involved in projects where it takes several rounds. Like they'll apply 1 year, they won't get it. It takes a couple of rounds of tax credit applications before they get the award.
Right.
So it's not a guarantee, and it does take time. I mean, most affordable housing projects I've worked on are, probably at least a minimum of 5 years from conception to completion, and most are probably longer than that.
Right.
It's a long process, and there's money that has to go out up front to buy the property and to pay the architects and all that to get you through an entitlement.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, again, that's a podcast in itself.
Yeah,
right
it really is.
Let's stick to Sebastopol and the 15-minute village right now. But we may have to have you come back and talk about that.
Yeah.
That'd be a really interesting podcast.
Yeah.
I'm going to shut up because I don't want to veer off.
Yeah.
But let's get back into the 15-minute village. How do you see you were just mentioning that there isn't a lot of vacant lots to do like bigger projects that way. Mm-hmm. So it's just through increased density that way. Mm-hmm. How do you see the 15-minute village being incorporated into Sebastopol? I mean, I guess a little. It has pretty good walkability right now in downtown.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a 15-minute village. I mean, I live downtown. I live a block off of Main Street, and I can, within a 15-minute walk. I mean, a 15-minute bike ride, I can get all the way across Sebastopol.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's like 2 square miles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm being great in 15 minutes. So it's not like. I think for anyone living in Sebastopol, it is a 15-minute village, really. Not everyone walks in Sebastopol. People, we're Americans and we just are just attached to our cars.
Right.
And we don't even often think that, I could walk this distance.
Yep.
But for the most part, definitely living downtown. I mean, I think I've looked up, haven't done it recently, but I think, where I live, my walk score is like 90 or something. I mean, I can walk within 15 minutes, I can walk to 3 grocery stores, like probably 5 banks,
right.
The post office, the library, lots of restaurants, a movie theater. We used to have a live theater downtown Sebastopol, and unfortunately closed. And just walking trail, like I can walk to the Joe Rodota Trail from my house, the West County Trail, like all of that. So recreation is close by, parks are close by. So, I mean, my office is on Main Street. It's a 3-minute and 15-second walk from my house.
Right.
And then when I'm at work, I can go to the bank or I can go to a bookstore. I can, all within, an easy 15-minute walk. So I think it's, even most people in Sebastopol, I think, live within about a 15-minute walk of downtown. Like I said, like not a lot of people do it, and I think it's sort of encouraging people that that's possible, and you don't need to get in your car, and it's good for you, and it's a nice walk. And most of our neighborhoods are nice to walk in, and
right.
There are some certainly improvements that have been made, and more that could be made to make crossings of Main Street. We have the kind of bulb outs that have been happening through the years. And when I first moved to Sebastopol, trying to cross Main Street, which is a really wide street, because we used to have a train going down the middle of it. Mm-hmm. So it's super wide, and there wasn't even a crosswalk to get to wanted to walk my toddler daughter to the Joe Rodota Trail.
Right.
You just had to really wait for a lot of clearance in the cars before you cross the street, because there was no crosswalks, there was no lights or any kind of thing that we have now. So they've been kind of slowly making improvements to make Sebastopol more walkable, and I think more can certainly be done. And I'm hoping that Main Street just still has a feel of being a state highway, because it is a state highway.
Right.
So
even though most ends of it are south end is 30 miles an hour, and I think north end is 30 as well, right?
Yeah, I think so. But it's just like when you're downtown, the one way I think isn't great, because it makes it feel more like a highway, because there's 2 or 3 lanes of traffic all going in the same direction, and that also just encourages people to go faster, because there's no kind of friction of another car coming at you.
Right.
And also the way Sebastopol is set up, because it does, it's a two-way street, or the one-way streets that then come back, on the south end of town. If you're heading south, that if you're in the left lane, that left lane's going to circle you back around. Right. So people are like speeding up to cut in, to get into the right lane so they can keep going, so it creates some not great driving behavior, I think. Or
like I see it here too, where I feel like it's maybe like driving behavior hasn't changed, where a lot of times there was just less people, and it was quicker to get through Petaluma and Sebastopol at one point, and so people are used to driving that way from 20 years ago. Still, they still have those habits, right? It's like so that section I still see here, like you're describing East Washington to me here in town, right? Like so, it's like has there been? I would think that Sebastopol's been a little bit more ahead of the times in terms, I would say, walkability and things like that. Mm-hmm. Has there been like a big discussion about how to make the main street more inviting to pedestrians that way?
Yeah, and I've been involved in a number of efforts over the years, and the thing that I'm kind of most excited about now is that we were just within the past couple months awarded a grant from Caltrans. It's called the Sustainable Communities Transportation Planning Grant. And it's to kind of look at that, like, how do we make Sebastopol, downtown Sebastopol in particular, a place that's more inviting to pedestrians, because it feels so dominated by the car right now that it's not. And so this grant, provides the city with a chunk of money to hire a consultant team, basically, to kind of explore that and to see, what can be done to improve the walkability, bikeability, just sort of alternate modes of transportation other than the car downtown, and hopefully kind of revitalize the downtown and support the businesses. Because, if it's not a place where people want to be, people aren't going to be there.
Right.
And I think Sebastopol's a really good case study between downtown Main Street and the Barlow. Because when you're in the Barlow, even though there are actually a lot of cars in the Barlow, there's a lot of parking, it doesn't feel so much like it because it's really dispersed. Right. The main kind of street through the Barlow, the traffic is slow.
Very slow.
You feel like you can just wander across the street kind of at any point. It just feels like a place for people. And there's actually are specific places. There's the little overhang kind of porch area outside Taylor Lane, and then Wood 4 has that raised deck area, and then there's a little kind of play pit by the food court. There's a lot of kind of different outdoor spaces that people can gather and congregate and hang out. And Main Street has none of that, and you see, I sometimes go to the Barlow, and eat that, walk down there and some evening, and you walk down Main Street and it is deserted.
Right.
Most of the businesses are closed. There's some restaurants stay open until 8. Sometimes 9, 10 on the weekends, a couple. But, then you walk into the Barlow and there's just people everywhere.
Right.
It just really is a very stark reminder of, if you create a place for people to be, people will go, And so I'm hoping that this grant will help, inspire some of that on Main Street to create a few more, sort of permanent parklet kind of ideas. Like we had some parklets during the pandemic that kind of, because of that whole issue.
Right.
And unfortunately, the last one was taken down last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess now. And it was people used it. It was really well used, and the city didn't really. And I've just been very frustrated with that. The city is, not kind of. Caltrans is like, you can make it permanent, but you have to go through this application process. It was a whole thing with Caltrans. That does certainly complicate things in Sebastopol, being a Caltrans right of way. Mm-hmm. But the parklets were really a great addition, I felt, to Main Street for while they were up, and now that's gone, and I think the businesses will notice it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I think we saw the same thing here. As well. We still have a couple up that are really the more, I guess, one of the extravagant one. Maybe I'm not sure the legality of it, but but it's really cool. And it was kind of like a no-brainer, right? It's that should have just continued after. That was like a lesson that we didn't learn. Or, it's like
I felt like I've been part of this group that was had been advocating for parklets. Years ago, we got the city to adopt a kind of a parklet ordinance and say you could do it. You have to go through Caltrans if you're on a Caltrans right away. And then there's the pandemic happened. Great, this is our opportunity. We're going to do it. And then we had them for a couple of years, and then the last one just got taken down.
Right.
There was just not I don't know if it wasn't the will or just the energy or time, staff time or whatever, but the city just kind of let it go by the wayside, unfortunately.
Yep.
It's so interesting you put out the Barlow that I didn't look at it from that perspective, but I think people now think of the Barlow as downtown Sebastopol.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's totally, I hear so many people, I love Sebastopol. They love the Barlow.
Yeah.
People from all over will come to Sebastopol specifically for that.
Yeah.
And then we'll walk around where they probably wouldn't have walked around before, but they'll park a lot farther away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could park on one side of the Barlow and walk to the other side, not even think about it. But you probably wouldn't park, at the north end of town by, I don't know, the post office and walk all the way down to Whole Foods. Yeah. Which is probably a similar distance. Yeah. But there's just so much in that centralized area that it really gets people around that area.
No, and I think there's a lot of it, and again, this comes back to this design of Main Street. Like, I think if it's a nice walking environment, you don't think of how far it is. Like, you're perfectly happy to walk 4 blocks if it's a nice walk. Right. You know, but people are like, I don't want to park by the post office to go to Copperfields or to go to the Barlow. Like, that's too far to walk. And it's like 4 minutes. It's not very far, but it's not super pleasant. It's not a nice walk. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really important part of it. If you make a pleasant environment, people will be certainly happy to be there. I mean, you go to Costco and you park halfway across the parking lot and you walk to the back of the store, and that's like the entirety of Sebastopol, you know? And people are willing to do that without giving it a second thought. That's really good. Yeah. But, it's just funny how we just have this expectation of parking where our destination, Yes. But again, you can park on one side of the Barlow and walk to the other side and think nothing of it because it's nice stuff to see on the way. There's people around, it's...
And like you said, the cars are so slow. I mean, you're never concerned about safety, whether it's kids or elderly or anyone. It's not even at mine because it is safe.
It's funny, and I think what you said about like people. I think there's a lot of people from around the Bay Area come to Sebastopol. I mean, Barlow does great at marketing themselves. Right. Yeah. Like they've got billboards up. They're in magazines. They really promote themselves, and people come to Sebastopol, go to the Barlow, and don't even go to Main Street. They just don't even know they exist. And there's a real lack of connection. There's the street that goes from the Barlow to Main Street. Once you get to kind of edge of the Barlow, it sort of falls apart. There's like no real. Again, it's just not a good pedestrian environment. But waiting for a number of years for that hotel to be built, which would really be, I think, a good connection. It would help make the connection between the Barlow and downtown.
Totally.
But right now it's just a vacant lot, and then there's the back wall of the movie theater on the other side of the street, and it's just not a place. If you don't know Main Street's there, you're not going to know it's there. Right. Yeah, vacant lots and hotels are really a sore subject in this town. I understand that. Speaking about how do you feel height and mass affect downtown? Let's kind of jump into that and type of those type of projects from a standpoint of what people actually perceive with their eyes compared to like. Yeah. I think it's really interesting because people get really worked up about height. I think there's, especially in small towns, like people have this fear that a multi-story building is going to destroy the small townness of their small town. But if you look at old, 19th century, small towns, many of them have 3 and 4 stories, like right on the main street. Like that's just how you built back then. Right. Like before we had the ability to spread so far out because of the car, when we had to sort of keep our towns more compact because people got around just by walking, that was really your only choice. They went up. And I don't think that having a 3 or 4 story building is going to destroy your small town character, and I think in many ways it could enhance it. Right. But there is this, I think that's part of the perception is just this, it's going to be a big city now because it's a 3 or 4 story building. But I don't think at the end of the day, like if you allow that to happen, that you're going to feel that way. There'll be a change maybe. I mean, we have 1 3-story building in Sebastopol. And if you say that to people, most people are like, we do? I didn't. Right. Where is that? And you tell them where it is, and they are like, oh, that's 3 stories? I'm like, yeah, that's what a 3-story building looks like. It's not blotting out the sun,
Right.
It's not creating some kind of weird wind tunnel effect because it's so tall, and it's not out of scale with a small town. And so I feel like there's definitely a real public concern about that, but I think I don't think it's really grounded in reality. And I feel like like in Sebastopol, we allow 3-story buildings downtown. We have one. It's not like when you allow that, like all of a sudden every building takes some kind of growth hormone and they all become 3 stories. Like that would be kind of overwhelming. Maybe that all happened all at once.
Right.
But if one happens here and a few years later one happens over there, and then that one's going to be 4-story, like it's just going to happen kind of randomly and haphazardly, and I don't think it's going to be completely overwhelming.
No, it probably, as generations look back, it'll probably enhance the character of that's what I think people will look back and be like, oh gosh, look at all these buildings, and there'll be an added feature. They won't be separated from the older buildings. They'll be all part of that, and there'll be an enhancement that way.
I mean, there's a real, and this is kind of an urban design thing, but successful streets need to feel like a room. It has to have like edges and walls, so people feel comfortable. We're not typically comfortable in wide open spaces. Right. I think it's very primal. Like we don't want to just be out in the middle of nowhere. We want to feel some sense of protection. There could be predators out there.
Right.
When we were back in the day. So I think that having a sense of containment, which a multi-story buildings can provide, also makes a more successful streetscape. It makes places where people feel like it's a space. When you have I think it's part of the issue with Sebastopol's plaza. We have a plaza downtown, but it's not really held in any way. There's no real sense of its boundary other than there's a street on 2 sides and then there's a parking lot on the other 2 sides, but it's not like Healdsburg. Healdsburg has a quaint, the perfect kind of quintessential kind of town square that's a square, but it has like buildings all around it, and it feels like it's a room. It feels like a space.
Right.
Where Sebastopol's plaza, it just sort of, the edges are very kind of amorphous. The Whole Foods across the street, it's, pushed back from the parking lot. The other side where the hotel is going to be is just an empty field. The other buildings are separated by a parking lot, so there's just no real sense of containment there.
Right. And
those buildings are very small too. They're all 1-story buildings. Like those were 3-story buildings across the parking lot. Like that would start to frame the plaza a little bit.
Sure.
But it's not that way right now. So the plaza is not a very active plaza like Healdsburg is, because I think it doesn't have that sense of space. People don't really like hanging out there because you feel a little exposed.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I've heard that. You did a very good job of articulating that right there, much better than I could, because I've tried to get that point across to people. It's a hard point, at least for me to explain to them. But you're exactly right.
I mean, Petaluma, I think you have a sense of that. Right downtown.
Yes,
your downtown sort of feels like a space.
Right.
It feels like you're kind of contained when you're walking down.
Yeah, with the older buildings, they don't have big setbacks, and
exactly.
Right.
You have some multi-story buildings downtown. You have some taller buildings, and they provide a sort of sense of containment.
Yes. Yep. No, totally agree with that. Why is urban fill important?
Probably for that reason.
Yeah, right.
Kind of you're. I've heard it described as like you're filling in. If you have like empty lots downtown, it's like having gaps in your teeth.
Right.
It's like you're missing teeth.
Yep.
And Sebastopol does have that problem as well on Main Street. Like there's like the couple of blocks that are the 2 main blocks that are pretty well filled in on both sides. But then as you get kind of further south and north, like they just kind of opens up into surface parking lots and buildings pushed back from the sidewalk, and you lose that sense of containment.
Right.
So I think infill helps, that aspect of it. And really, in a place like Sebastopol, the infill really needs to be housing. There needs to be more people living downtown that have this opportunity to live in a 15-minute village.
Right.
There's not huge sites downtown, but the ones that we do have could be used for housing. And there's been some that have been for sale. They have a variety of issues that has, I think, limited their development potential. And part of it is our zoning code, and parking requirements in particular. I think we don't realize that, downtown Petaluma, downtown Sebastopol, all these downtowns, like, we literally could not develop them today. Like, if you wanted to build a new building, like on Main Street in Sebastopol, whatever you're building, you have to park it on that lot.
Right.
Like, I don't know if Petaluma has a parking district or anything like that, but Sebastopol did a number of years ago. It doesn't exist anymore. So there was a building right on the main block of Main Street that was for sale a couple of years ago, and it has a restaurant and a kind of a rock gem mineral shop. It's like a very nondescript, like 1960 era building. It was for sale, and the obvious thing to do would be to tear it down, rebuild it as like commercial ground floor and 3 stories of residential above, which you could do from a zoning code standpoint, but you have to park all of that on the lot. And which means you'd have to have a curb cut off of Main Street to go into like a parking lot, which you wouldn't want that. You don't want a driveway cutting across the Main Street, sidewalk. So that lot is not, there's nothing that could happen with that because you can't park it. And there was no alternate parking for it. Like, the city just doesn't, if you can't put parking on the lot, then you can't do it.
Right.
So like that, and I know of a friend that owns a property at the edge of the Barlow. It's right across from Taylor Lane. There's an empty lot there. And he bought it before when the Barlow was just sort of being talked about. He thought it'd be kind of a good investment, but it's not developable. Like, because he has to park whatever he does on that lot, and it's only probably...
Does Sebastopol have parking minimums as well?
Yeah. So they have parking minimums, and you have to do it on the lot that you're developing.
Right.
There's some exceptions, like you can, like the Barlow has there's a lot of different properties in the Barlow, but they kind of all share in the parking. So they have, kind of covenants or whatever kind of restrictions on where the parking is, that's being used for everybody's purposes. So that you can do things like that. But if you're just a developer who wants to buy a piece of land in downtown Sebastopol, it's for sale, like the one I just mentioned, like, you've got to park it on that lot.
And this is the reason why we had you on the podcast, why this is so important. Like, just going back to this, like, whether it's Sebastopol or Petaluma or Santa Rosa, all the articles in the Press Democrat recently regarding their downtown, the solution's the same.
Yeah,
it's pretty much the same solution, and it's just so frustrating that we call this podcast the 15-minute village, because we really want to explain what this is about. It's about like pulling back these zoning restrictions, and so that communities can figure things out. So it's like almost less government involvement and let the free market figure things out. And you have these lots that could totally benefit the community, right? Yeah. But it can't be because of the current zoning and parking restrictions that way. And it's like whether we're in Petaluma or Sebastopol or Santa Rosa and or anywhere in California, you're going to be having this argument now, and the solution's pretty much the same thing. And that's why it's so important that let's just think about this. It's not about killing your you can still drive. We still want you to have your car, but here's the thing: it's just creating freedom of what the community wants and giving options of okay. Yeah, I have my car, and maybe I'm going to take it over here, but maybe I want to walk or ride my bike over here, right? So that's what's just so important is there's really, and if there's a second solution, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah.
Because no one's brought it to my attention at this point, right? And so but everything that you're saying is this is the solution all the way around, and it's just so ridiculous that it seems like we're constantly in every community we're having these arguments.
I feel like we're much more concerned about where we're going to house our cars than where we're going to house our people.
Right.
We have so many regulations that are revolved. I mean, as an architect, literally the first thing I do when I get a new project, especially a multifamily or commercial kind of project, is how's the parking going to work?
Right.
How many parking spaces do I need? The first thing I lay out is the parking.
Yep.
Before I get to any architecture, that's the first thing you have to do, because the parking drives the project, which is really sad. It's not about the housing. It's not about creating places for people to be. It's about creating places to put our cars when we're not in them.
Right.
Well, it puts a halt to so many projects.
It does.
Yeah, that's how I got connected with Dave Alden. So, I mean, I I've been in real estate for almost 20 years now, but for like 15, parking never really crossed my, maybe 13. And then all of a sudden I started working with the developer projects and parking started coming in. And so I started just reading more about parking.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, where does these, okay, well, what's the scientific data and how, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like these were kind of basically pulled out of thin air.
Yeah.
And so then I was like pretty much kind of walking around talking to myself about parking.
Yeah.
And someone was saying like, do you know who Dave Alden is? Like you need to go. And then the next day we're having lunch and had this conversation and pretty much, yeah, he's just a wealth of knowledge that way. But yeah, it's just parking is absolutely ridiculous.
It's really crazy how much attention and effort we focus and how so much of what we do is focused about cars. I mean, I have projects I did this project. It was an existing building. Guy wanted to do a second floor. He wanted to put a few different apartments on the second floor. He wanted to do 3 apartments on the second floor, but he couldn't park it.
Right.
So he came down to 1. He's like, I can do 1. And because it was a funny lot, there was an existing parking lot. It was very small and very non-legal kind of parking lot. It was very funky parking lot, but the planning director at the time was willing to, okay, you've got those parking spaces, you can count those, but the curb in front of the building was striped, so he couldn't count any street parking. The building was literally within a half a block of 2 city parking lots. And so anyway, we designed just a single unit, single apartment, because we could park it, and the developer and the owner of the building was thinking he might move into it. It was a really beautiful apartment. It was kind of up just west, 1 block west of Main Street, kind of kitty corner from the library in Sebastopol. From the second floor, just had beautiful views over downtown towards Santa Rosa and the hills. And anyway, designed it, actually got a building permit, and then he couldn't afford to do it. But if it had been 3 units, he probably could have afforded it because he could have, been more rental income for the 3 units than the 1. But he couldn't park 3 units. He can only park 1. So that project, there's things like that just don't happen because we have this like weird obsession about parking. And you look around any of our communities and there's just so much parking. I mean, Strongtown does this thing. I don't know if you've already seen this, but they do every Black Friday where they do this.
They ask
people to take pictures of parking lots,
right?
Because that's the busiest parking day of the year. You go take a picture of the parking lot at the mall or whatever and see how many empty spaces there are. It's like, why do we? There's so many parking spaces in the world.
So we're weirdos because we're starting a Facebook page called Petaluma Parking, and we've been driving around to the 2 big parking structures that we have here and taking pictures at various times during the day and the week, and there's no parking issues. In fact, one's like probably 20% full most of the time, and the top level is always available, and there's still spaces in other levels. So it's like, it's that same perception that way. It's just
I did this thing for a couple of years. This was a number of years ago because I work downtown, I live downtown, I walk on Main Street a lot. Every time I walked down Main Street, I counted the number of parking spaces just on the street, not on the side streets, not in the parking lots, just the number of vacant spaces for like 4 block stretch of Main Street, 4 or 5 block stretch of Main Street. And there was, I think, I never counted less than 10 empty parking spaces on the street.
Right.
And again, like not the side streets, not any parking lots. There were always 10 spaces on Main Street within those 4 blocks. But yet people talk about the parking problem downtown. Well, I can't park when I come downtown. I don't go downtown to Sebastopol because I can't park.
Right.
You just don't want to walk.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I get it comes back to the walking environment. Like if it was pleasant to walk, people probably wouldn't mind. Or if there was something to do, like when we have Peacetown concerts in downtown Sebastopol. Sometimes they're at the Barlow. They've been moved to the Barlow mostly, but then sometimes they do a couple a year at Ives Park. I live like 2 blocks from Ives Park, and there's cars all the way down my block, because there's an event and people want to go to it. They're willing to walk a couple blocks.
Right.
So if you make a place where people want to be or an event where people want to be, when the Peacetown's in the Barlow, it's packed in there. When the Barlow has those markets, once a month they have a weekend where they do the street fair. There's a ton of people there. There's plenty of places to park, even though they block off the street and take up a lot of parking because of the street vendors. Totally. People figure it out. The main plaza in Sebastopol, they have the farmers market, and they take out all the parking. Everyone's like, oh, we need that parking. You can't get rid of that parking. We talk about expanding the plaza. Oh, we need that parking. It's like we have the farmers market.
Right.
And that's an event where people are coming to. some people walk there, but a lot of people drive there and they find a place to park, So if you have an event or something, a place people want to be, people will figure out the parking.
Right. No, you're speaking to the choir. So,
I can tell.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know how to get people to overcome that.
Yeah.
Like I just don't know what the method is for getting people to, I don't know, hang on to this. Like there's not enough parking. There's not enough
It's
parking.
just change. I mean, and part of it is that I think some people just don't want any change at all, and that's probably the thing that they grasp on to make sure that no change happens is the parking.
I mean, and we heard at that affordable housing talk a couple of weeks ago, but I mean, as someone who's been in front of a lot of, public meetings for affordable housing projects, that is like the number one issue the neighbors will talk about.
Right.
Parking.
Yep.
There's not enough parking.
Right.
There's not enough parking for this project. Where are people going to park? It's going to impact me because there's not enough parking. That is the number one. Every single affordable housing project I've ever worked on, that comment will be made.
Right. Yeah.
I guarantee it. But I just don't know how we get people to get beyond that and see that it's really not the issue that they think it is.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. I don't know. It's almost like it would be an interesting field for like a psychologist to study that way, to see exactly what exactly is that issue that way.
I mean, there's been plenty of once the affordable housing project gets built and there's not a parking problem. I mean, but people still kind of hang on to that for the next one. The next one comes along. Well, that one's not going to have enough parking. Or that's going to impact my parking and. I don't know, but cities have been getting rid of parking minimums, and their worlds don't seem to be ending.
Right.
And most of the stories I hear and read about those places that do end their parking minimums, it's a positive in the end. Good things are happening in those places.
Yeah, exactly. Or again, let the free market decide. We've spoken to some that says like 0.8 parking spaces per unit. Is kind of like the bottom for some certain projects, So I mean, if you can reduce it to less than one a unit, just let the free market figure it out, And if that's what people want, and they're living in the units, then what's the issue? I don't understand.
No, a developer is not going to build a project that he can't rent the units.
Totally.
Right. He's going to say, I need to rent these units. People are going to have some cars, so I need to provide. It's not like if you say no minimum parking, developers are going to say, okay, we're not going to build any parking.
Right.
Because they're not going to sell their units or rent their units or whatever. Like they need to provide some parking, but let them figure out what they need.
Right.
And not have this weird random, because they are just totally random, these requirements.
Yeah.
They're not really based in any.
Well, it's not a one size fits all. I forget who it was that we were talking to. I think it was maybe the affordable housing event that we were at together, where they built a project right next to a transit station, and I don't think they provided any on-site parking. It was very little, maybe less than half a spot per unit. Yeah. So for a project like that, it totally works.
Yeah.
You put a project like that on the outskirts of town, and obviously you're with no public transportation. It's not going to work. Yeah. But it goes back to let the free market decide. They figure that for that project that makes sense. For another project, it might not make sense.
There's a nonprofit. I think it's called Transform. It's a Bay Area nonprofit, and they talk about this thing. They had a program. I don't know if it's still in place, where they went and looked at a bunch of multifamily housing projects and counted the number of parking spaces that were available and did a whole analysis of like where they were, if they're close to public transportation, and they had this whole kind of guidelines of kind of recommendations, and even the things like if you give everybody a public transit pass, what does that do to your parking requirement? Or if you have a car share program amongst the multifamily house, if you had some car share cars, what is that? And you say there's all these kind of other things you can do to really encourage people to reduce their car ownership. Yeah,
California's like e-bike coalition now. They're subsidizing, or I know employers are getting involved in these programs. So
I think there's a lot of things that you can do to encourage people to reduce their car usage, because cars are expensive to own and maintain. And if you don't have to pay car payments and pay car insurance and pay for gas and pay for all this stuff, like you actually have a lot more money in your pocket at the end of the day.
Right.
To do other more fun things than just owning a car.
Yep.
That sits. I mean, we have 2 cars, my wife and I, and then sometimes I'm like, why do we have 2 cars? Because I walk to work. I mean, sometimes my car sits on the street for a week.
Right.
Without getting used. So I'm not sure why I'm going to go get rid of sell my car when I leave here.
No, I understand. Again, let the free market kind of figure that out, right?
Yeah.
So, I understand. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we haven't touched today?
Nothing burning at the moment.
Probably going to have you back on. Yeah.
We get to keep talking for a long time.
Yeah, no, we'll have to have you back on a couple segments because there's a lot I'd still like to talk about. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
My email address is paul@fritzarchitecture.com. That's probably a good way. I do have a blog on my website. It's fritzarchitecture.com or smalltownurbanism.com. You can contact me through those as well. My phone number is 707-975-6220. Open for architecture or urbanism kind of discussions or work.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Sure.
I knew this was going to be a great discussion. It was, and hopefully we can have more in the future that way.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Isaiah, thank you very much for joining us as well. And if you guys like this, please hit like and subscribe so you can see future content. Thank you guys. Talk to you later.
See you next time.
Welcome to the Live Explore podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit like and subscribe.